I'm Sabrina Siebens. Here with me today at Jedox headquarters is Margaret Transfed, a trainer and consultant here at Jedox.
Good morning, Sabrina.
Nice to have you here. So I have an issue that I've come across, and I heard you'd be able to help me with it.
Mm-hmm.
So as I sent you, I have an issue in that I have some things that are going to change in a dimension I have with HR data. Mm-hmm. In this case, as you can see, Veronica Irwin is getting married, and so her name is changing, and she got a promotion. And I've heard that there's a lot of different ways that I can handle this change, but I'm not sure what the pros and cons are or what I need to take into consideration before I actually do anything.
Okay. Yeah, fine. Right, so let's see how you actually use your data, and let's have a look in your modeler first to see what you've got first. Oh, very good. Okay, so you have been using this employee information, and you have been replicating the structures that you showed me before, meaning you have all information in an employee dimension where you have a mixture of department and grades. Fine. This dimension, like you mentioned, is changing. You've got a change happening. And what we are facing here is what we call this slowly changing dimension.
Yeah.
Have you heard about it?
Yeah, I've heard about it, but I don't know a lot about it.
Okay, fine. I think, first of all, maybe that's something that you should maybe have in mind. It's not something that is just happening here. You know, it's a recurring topic that has been keeping a lot of business intelligence and data warehouse busy. Mm-hmm. This subject, if you think about it, what is a subject about? This term is describing unpredictable, changes in a dimensions. So like your dimension, the employee dimension, you've got a change happening. And what slowly changing dimensions is about is, first of all, dealing with changes in your data structure, in your data model over time. Mm-hmm. And the next thing as well is about finding different approaches. How can you deal about it? And most specifically, how can you deal about keeping historical data for future reference? If you think about it, just have a look. You told me, yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm, that's the report?
Yeah. And that's what we're actually facing at the moment, because the change you are facing may have implication on reports.
Yeah. Don't want to accidentally change something and then a whole bunch of reports are broken and I have a bunch of angry report designers with me.
Exactly. And what is also very important, obviously, because you've got to change over time, like, this person will change her name, which is one little thing, major thing. But the other thing is you've got to change in the structure. It goes from one grade to the others. So at the end of the day, if we look here, whatever information you've been storing in this cube need to actually follow. So if you've got a report which show information about the grade for this department, like here you've got vacation days or planned vacation days, you want to make sure when the person moves from this level to the next one that you actually are able to track from 2018 the information over time. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if we think about it, how to actually deal with changes, and if we think about this slowly changing dimension as a general topic, people have different way of dealing with the issue. But the first thing that is very important to understand and to consider is, what do you want to do with the changes?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think one of the key information first is to find out, if we look back at your example here, this before situation and after situation. Do you want to keep track of history? So that would be the first point you have to think about. And depending on whether or not you want to keep track of history, if you don't mind about losing the fact that Veronica was here and now is moving to a different department, meaning you don't mind about forgetting information that happened in the before situation, then we will go for maybe one approach, which would be more this kind of update approach, where you
Okay, so keyword update. So that's
exactly
yeah.
keyword update, and basically you replicate your after situation in your dimension. Your employee dimension will reflect the state of the after state.
Okay, yeah, but that means if I, for whatever reason, maybe for an audit, can't show that Veronica had been at the junior level before, that would be gone.
Exactly. You are actually missing this history. You can't track back. Maybe one thing that would be more critical in this case, but we can look at it a little bit later. At the moment, Veronica is staying in the company, so it's not too much of an issue. You still have the element Veronica staying around. But that could be an issue if, for example, one of the employees is leaving the company.
I could see that, definitely.
Yeah. So, like I said, in terms of approach, one of the key information to look and consider is, first of all, do I need to keep the information? Do I need to be able to track what happened before? So that's the first consideration you have to think about in terms of knowing how you actually go forward. The second information or consideration you have to think about is how often or how frequent do you think this change will happen?
Yeah, if it's a one-time thing, it's probably easier to do some sort of workaround solution than if it's something that happens once a month.
Exactly. Exactly. Because obviously, if you actually think about, promotion, maybe people going and this fluctuation in the company, when you have been starting creating your data model, you may have not thought about that and maybe have given a sort of snapshot of the company as it is at the moment, right? Which is normally, what you think about. But obviously, the data model is evolving and things are changing around, and you are now really facing the fact that, there is a change and I need to deal with it. But is it just a one-off thing, or is it really going to happen? And especially in this case, when you deal with employee, and it is quite a frequent thing that employee do move, in grades, they actually move up, obviously. Or you do have new people coming in, people coming out,
Or switching departments even.
Switching departments, exactly. So obviously this will also have an impact on the structure, and you may have to actually really think about how you actually capture the information in this sense. So before, when we were talking about, do I want to keep history or not keep the history, we talk about update. Now we are talking about changes. How frequent am I going to have this change? And obviously, if it's something that will happen quite often, you may consider splitting this information in different dimensions.
Okay.
Right. But that's, again, something we can also maybe look at later on.
Yeah, that would be great.
Because coming back here to your modeler, all the information that you've been kind of having as consulting and grade, maybe that's something you want to extract as well from your employee dimension and have in different dimension. Okay. Right, so we talk about the fact that you have to really look at whether or not you want to keep your data. So this historical point. So if you really want, which is normally the case, you want to actually record the data and you want to make sure you don't lose the information you have already in your cube. The next point was about how frequent you actually think the information will happen. We did already mention the fact that we had the split dimensions. That is generally something that you use when you've got, and when you know you will have a lot of changes coming on, so you want to split the information.
Okay, so yeah, if it's high frequency, the splitting can make sense.
That's right.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Obviously, there is also one option, and one option which could happen. You are thinking, it's maybe a one-off change, and the information will change, but will not change very often. So in this case, when you think, okay, so that's maybe something that happened and will happen once, you may actually think about having your before situation in your dimension, and as a parallel hierarchy,
Okay.
replicate your after scenario.
Yeah, because I mean the base elements are the same, and so only the groupings would be different.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, that
Exactly.
makes sense, yeah.
So that would be really something you actually go for when it's a one-off things and you know it's not going to happen very often. Mm-hmm. But obviously in your case, we would like and would expect that people actually do move. Mm-hmm. So maybe this kind of parallel hierarchy, I mean, I can show you how to get that, but in this special example, that's maybe not something that you really want to go for.
Mm-hmm. But it's also just good to know what my options are, because things like this are always going to come up again. It's hard to plan a data model perfectly before you know what's going to happen with a company. So
That's right. That's right, exactly. Right, so if we kind of think about back, so whether or not you want to keep the history is really one big consideration. Second is how frequent is a change going to happen. So we look at two different options. And the next thing is about maintenance and, you know, how much work will be in the background when you do that. And how much space do you have available?
always depends.
That's true. Because obviously, having this thing about parallel hierarchy will have an impact at one point on the performance of your report. Mm-hmm. You know, obviously, if you think about it, you know, we are having at the moment one hierarchy, but the more parallel structure you will get, if you've got a very large dimension with lots of elements, that may actually slow down some of the report you are doing.
Yeah, because then the cube at some point would get huge, right?
The cube itself may not be huge because you've got the same number of elements at the base.
Of course, yeah.
That's fine, but it's just, you know, when you actually go and pick up one hierarchy or one, it's just like different perspective, but still that may slow down. Okay. You have to be careful with parallel hierarchy.
Mm-hmm. Good to know.
Yeah. So actually for this type of thing, you may have also different approach. But that is only, for instance, when you've got very large dimension with lots of elements, you may actually think about recording information in different cubes. Mm-hmm. So that would also be one option, where, let's say, one cube may actually have information about the before scenario. Mm-hmm. So that's the structure of your company before a change happened. And you have stored in this cube all the information. And when the change happens, you may actually have a separate cube where you actually get the information after the change. Obviously, for this kind of approach, you need to make sure you've got enough space because that would actually replicate the number of cube and that will have an impact on the storage. Mm-hmm. Also, with this type of approach, you will end up having to grab on different pots, like, you know, when you are in your report and you look at this scenario, you will pick up in one cube, and if you want to make a comparison going forward, you have to grab on a different cube. Mm-hmm. So from the report side, you just have to change things as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, there is maybe one last approach that you could also use, meaning you would actually keep one single dimension like you've got at the moment, but you would actually capture the changes with using attribute information.
Okay.
So we can also have a look at it, but basically use and store the changes in a sort of attribute, and work with the attribute to actually restore information at a special point of time. So you have to have a mix of information in an attribute or in a control cube stored somewhere.
So I could kind of see that as maybe previous department. If, let's say someone switches from the legal department to consulting, that I could have previous department, then legal. Is that?
Well, you would, I mean, that could be one thing, but then you would have, I think that one idea would be more to work with dates and clearly say, okay, this person was in this department from this date to this date. So you kind of work with a from to sort of attribute. And when you are in a report, you would actually go with a sort of, you will filter element based on this kind of from to dates. Right. I mean, we can maybe have a quick look.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But
so basically, like if I try to sum up, when you face a change in your dimension, you really have to think before doing anything and finding the right approach. You really have to consider like key points like, do I need to keep the history? Yes or no? How frequent is going to be the change? Maybe it's a one-off change, maybe it's something that will happen very often. And obviously the last 2 points that are quite key to consider is how much work this change, whatever you actually decide to go for, will have as implication on my reports, on my data model. And the last point is, how much space do I have? Because if you don't have any space, you don't want to go with this kind of replicating cubes.
Yeah, practical considerations.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, yeah, that's a lot to take in, but you kind of almost made it like a flow chart. Consider this. Okay, if not, then you have an easy solution. And here, all right, I think I can follow that, and I'm looking forward to learning more about it.
Thank you very much.